Okay.
Like I think, hello?
Yep, I just hit the record button.
Okay, so you're recording?
I'm recording.
All right, me too. So, what did you want to touch base on today?
Well, number one, the fact that, number one, Andrew Yang, when I went to read his site and look at, he has his policies lined out in detail. He not only has a plan, he has a roadmap of how to implement the plan. Okay.
Yeah.
Bernie talks about a plan, but there's no concrete anything about it, like how it's going to be implemented. I mean, there's nothing.
That's the same beef that I have with his policies, is that he doesn't explain things, like Andrew Yang does.
Well,
Like he explains everything, like from point A to point B all the way to Z.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but there's another huge problem I have with Bernie. And, I was a huge Bernie supporter, and I initially was very mistrustful of Andrew Yang because I'm poor, I'm diabetic, and the first thing I heard was, oh, he's going to force poor diabetics with no income who've been pushed out of the economy into choosing between the Medicaid to pay for the $1,300 a month insulin and other diabetic medications we need to not die, or a basic income that we also need to not die. Right. And that was all I needed to hear as an older lady in poverty who, struggled against the barriers of age discrimination, trying to re-enter the workforce after I learned a little bit of coding in my late 40s, only to, not get a chance for a job anywhere for anything. So, right. It was a knee-jerk reaction on my part to initially, because Bernie has, well, for lack of a better word, Bernie has brand recognition. He has a track record for arguing on behalf of the poor. But the thing is that it's one thing to build a following based on anger, but it's another thing when it's time to actually produce proof of your plan and say, this is what my plan is, this is how we're going to implement it, and this is why it's better than this other guy's plan over here.
Right.
Bernie has not done that. Bernie has just says, oh, no UBI, I got a better idea. Well, I would have loved to have stayed supporting Bernie, except for the problem was I found out, and this was after I actually got into a huge blow up with Scott Santens on Twitter myself, because Stephanie Kelton had succeeded in scaring me away from supporting Andrew Yang initially. She succeeded.
Let's go into explaining who Stephanie Kelton is, because there's a lot of people who don't know who she is.
Okay, Stephanie Kelton is Bernie Sanders' policy advisor. She's an economist and a professor, a tenured professor at Stony Brook College, which is not a backwater state school like what I went to as a poor person. She she has a tenured position at a prestigious private college in New York, in Long Island, New York. Okay. All right. She is from the Levy Institute. She co-authored a paper with another economist named L. Randall Wray, otherwise we call him Randy Ray, that basically flat out lied and said LBJ's AFDC and other Great Society programs didn't do anything to help the poor. Now, as many problems as there were with those programs, it's a flat out lie that they did absolutely nothing to help the poor. They eliminated extreme poverty in the United States, which I, showed proof of in my Medium article that, you know, you see me linked to several times, one titled America's Dad Has a Problem.
Yeah, I love that article.
Right. So regardless of what somebody's position is on LBJ or the Great Society programs, honesty and integrity is important to me when running a campaign based on promising help to poor, struggling people that literally are in life and death poverty situations. And when I went and saw that she had co-authored this paper to promote the federal jobs guarantee, and around the same time that America's poorest women were being thrown off of welfare courtesy of Bill Clinton's welfare reform, you know, and that this was something that she had basically stuck to her guns with, and that Randy Ray has repeated several times online on the internet. Oh, you know, these programs have not helped the poor. No, they did help the poor before they were cut. They just didn't help the poor enough, and they didn't help in the right way. That's, you know, really the truth, if we're going to be honest about it.
In what way did it help the poor?
Well, people were starving to death. The poor people that had no incomes and who were completely marginalized from the job market during America's heyday, the golden age of the American middle class. Okay, back in 1959, you still had a 30% poverty rate. You still had many people that were not being included and that, you know, didn't have a toehold onto the jobs ladder. And you had in states, in many of the Appalachian states, like West Virginia, for example, you had 200 deaths per year in West Virginia alone due to starvation and poverty.
Wow.
Before LBJ's programs. I mean, this is fact. This is actual verifiable fact. So, yeah, so LBJ's programs were designed to eliminate that, but the problem is that, you know, like there is today, there's just this large contingency of people who just don't want to give any money to the poor. You know, they don't want to give us opportunities. They don't want to give us money. They don't want to give us a leg up, you know, even though they know that there's not enough jobs to go around for everybody. And especially today, there's even less jobs to go around for everybody. And the jobs that do exist don't pay enough to live. People that are lucky to have jobs have 2-3 low-wage jobs. And then you got people like me who can't get any job at all, you know, and it's not for lack of trying. But the fact is that disturbed me was when I saw that. And yet she was, you know, featured in an interview by Jane Sanders, who's Bernie Sanders' wife. You know, from the Sanders.
I might have seen that one. It was, what was it? It was like sponsored by the Sanders Foundation or something like that.
Yeah, the Sanders Institute. They featured Stephanie Kelton on, and we're talking about how, you know, her federal job guarantee was better, and she was, you know, dripping with this fake concern for the poor and saying how, well, you know, the middle class and the rich are going to invest their apples. The poor are going to have to, or, you know, or how did she say it? Oh, she said the poor are going to have to eat their apples while the rich and the middle class invest in Apple, or something to that effect. And and then, you know, and I thought, you know, how disingenuous it was for her to say that when she was supporting with Randy Ray, you know, was rabidly opposed to any kind of measure that would give poor people money, you know, so that we could sort our lives out in ways that are best for us. Obviously, food stamps don't do you any good when you're poor and you live in a rural area and you have no car and you have no way to get groceries, and the Instacart app does not accept the EBT card.
Exactly.
Right? Hello. That's the situation my elderly husband and I are in. And I'm a 52-year-old woman who's diabetic. So I need food just as much as I need, you know, my diabetes medication so I don't die. And when I hear people that are not poor talking about what they think I need, right away, the hairs on the back of my neck go up right away. Now, initially I was very strongly in support of Bernie, and I was very mistrustful of Andrew Yang, because Stephanie Kelton was running all over Twitter, and this is before I really knew who she was. And she was saying, you know, oh yeah, you sign up for this UBI, sign away your Medicaid, you'll die, you won't get your insulin. There won't be any help for you if you want a job, but you face discrimination in getting a job, you know, and all this nonsense. Well, it's not, you know, I mean, it's not nonsense. It's actually stuff that's valid. It's a valid complaint that a lot of poor marginalized people have. But she was saying all this stuff and saying that Andrew Yang was basically going to force poor diabetics to choose between the Medicaid we need to not die and the basic income we also need to not die. So that scared, I don't know how many millions of poor diabetics, just poor diabetics alone, away from voting for Andrew Yang. And she had gotten into a heated Twitter discussion with Scott Santens. When I've had my own disagreements with Scott Santens, don't get me wrong. But when the man is right about something, he's right, okay? And, you know, a person can dig their heels in all they want. Facts are what they are. And in any event, Stephanie Kelton was saying, oh, see, you know, this is what these privileged tech bros think of the poor, that, you know, they just want to, you know, con the poor into giving up their social programs. And I'm thinking, what social programs? I'm not getting any income support. I have zero income. My husband gets $1,000 and $37 a month. So Social Security, retirement, disability. He's SSDI, not SSI.
Okay.
I can't get anything. You know, except food stamps that I can't use. I mean, I might as well wipe my ass with that EBT card, because I don't have a car to get to the supermarket with. I don't have
it's not convenient for you at all.
Convenient. Hell, it's not possible. I can't walk 10 miles to the nearest supermarket.
Yeah, I understand that. I hear that. And then, like you said earlier, the apps, you know, usually for delivery or anything like that, they don't accept EBT.
No, they don't. And not only that, but, you know, I'm a 52-year-old woman who's been through a lot of shit. Excuse my French.
Yeah.
But I think at my age, I've more than earned the right to not be treated like an errant child. In other words, the hell with the food stamps. Let me at least have enough of an income so that I'm not suffering in extreme life-threatening poverty, and I have somewhat of a chance to maybe dig my way out. And we both had this discussion earlier today on Facebook with that Bernie guy, that Berner, who was saying how we were stupid and selfish, and what are the other things he claimed, that we didn't understand our, you know, economics and all this other nonsense, you know, you know, UBI wouldn't be enough to afford a car for me. Well, UBI wouldn't need a car. I could create my own job working from home.
Exactly.
You know, and I wouldn't have to worry about the apps not accepting food stamps. I'd actually have enough money to get enough healthy food that's diabetic friendly every month by using my basic income. And my husband would get the basic income too, on top of his Social Security. So we would be instantly lifted up above poverty. And this is after, you know, literally overnight. I mean, you know, and my husband is 76. I don't know. He doesn't have much longer to live. He might live another year, another 2 years, or another 4 years. But daggone it, even if what we had was $36,000 a year household income for 2 years, or even 1 year, that would be 1 year in our lives that we finally weren't poor, that we finally weren't so poor we were literally at risk of dying from freezing to death in the winter, from facing losing our modest rundown home to back due property taxes that we couldn't afford, on me having zero income and him only getting $1,000 a month in Social Security, which is not enough for two people to survive, you know.
Exactly.
And the thing is that, you know, before we lost our car to repossession, I tried for several years to get a job. I didn't get hired. Nobody wants to hire an older woman with a work history gap. You know, it doesn't matter. But, you know, gee whiz, if I had a basic floor on which to stand, you know, maybe I could chart my own path and do a better job of it. And I'm not the only person who's come to that realization. But what really did it for me with me breaking apart from supporting Bernie Sanders was when I saw that Stephanie Kelton not only lied about Andrew Yang, because I went to investigate. Even though I initially thought, oh yeah, these guys are all privileged tech bros, they're all rich young kids who, that's what was being, you know, circulated by Bernie supporters, that Yang supporters were all spoiled rich young kids who were rich techies who just didn't want to pay taxes for social programs for the poor. Oh yeah. I mean, you know, the shit was deep. You needed to get some hip boots. Wade through that, you know?
You know what's funny about that is that either we're that or we're a bunch of bots on the internet.
Or 4chaners.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny, but once I realized that I was batting for the wrong team and I had to correct course by first, number one, apologizing to YangGang, everybody in YangGang, and number two, apologizing to Andrew Yang. Yeah. You know, and I explained, hey, this was out of a knee-jerk reaction because I'm an older woman struggling as diabetic in life-threatening poverty. And all I needed to hear is libertarians, rich white tech bros, and boom, you know, that was all I needed to hear. And unfortunately, you know, that's how it is with most people. They don't, you know, it takes something really earth-shattering to wake them up. And for me, my boo rattly moment, my earth-shattering moment, forcing me to re-examine everything, was when I found that Stephanie Kelton had lied in her economics paper, and when I found what these guys are really proposing in their federal job guarantee program, that, by the way, Bernie has still, as of this date, as of this conversation we are having right now, Bernie has still not yet outlined on his website, like Andrew Yang has for his plan. Bernie has not done so with his. So there's no way to say what kind of plan Bernie has, if he has a plan, or if he's just talking, you know, smoke. If he's just talking, you know, wishful thinking or something, because there is no clear-cut path to implementation and how he's going to overcome any potential objections to his plan. Now,
you know the thing about that is like how you mentioned that guy from earlier in that thread. He kept using words like it could be or it can be.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that Bernie Sanders' plan is not clean cut, straight to the point. And he's basically like with his plan is basically like, I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for years. I know what my job is. I know how to get us there. Just trust me. I'm not going to tell you how, but just trust me.
Yeah, that's not good enough for me.
That's not good enough for me either. Like I like to deal with a guy that's gonna tell me exactly how he plans to implement it. Like when he walks into that room to negotiate bringing costs down as far as medication, like for your diabetes medication, when he walks into that room and has that conference and says, this is what I want to negotiate. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen next. That's what I want to know. I want to know what he's going to say when he walks into that room and he negotiates these
I want to know what exactly his plan is. And what I was really disturbed about is, because where I live in rural northwestern Pennsylvania, where we get Arctic weather, winter weather conditions and temperatures up here. Okay. I'd like to know if he does put together a plan, how is this logistics going to be carried out for people like me who have no car? I mean, I don't live in New York City. I don't live in Philadelphia. I don't live on the West Coast where there's Google buses to come pick me up at my house. You know, I live, you know, in an area with little to no public transport, and it's too expensive to take an Uber anywhere. I'd like to know how Bernie is going to implement a jobs program that will help people like me. If people like me are not meant to be included in his plan, then I want to know, well, what the hell does he plan to do for people like me? Let us just die from poverty? You know, I mean, he talks this good game about, oh, you know, we need an economy that doesn't leave any Americans behind. And we have an economy that only works for billionaires. Well, speaking of those billionaires, one of them is Warren Mosler, who's the founder of the Levy Institute, who's the founding father of modern monetary theory and the federal jobs guarantee, which is nothing but really a workfare program. And, you know, that other people have described it as such. And at first I didn't believe them, but then after my eyes were open, it was like, okay, yeah, I get it. I see now. And these people openly admitted, they publicly admitted that their whole stance is coming from a position of those who don't work shall not eat, regardless of what their circumstances is of why they're not working. You know, and when I say not working, I mean not working in the sense of having a traditional, you know, outside the home job, you know.
Yeah. A job that pays.
Yeah, and so when I saw that, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Bernie is not this progressive that he's selling everybody a bag of goods into believing that he is. What he's doing is he is selling tickets to an anger fest. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that. I need solutions to my problems of being able to survive. I suffered my entire life as a poor, marginalized woman. I overcame, you know, a learning disability to earn a college degree in math. I don't know if you can see, but behind the wall, there is my math degree.
Yeah, I can vaguely see it a little bit.
Yeah, in hopes of getting hired as a high school math teacher. And I earned that 25 years ago while homeless and hungry, literally eating from garbage cans. So, wow. Yeah. So when they say about, oh, the safety net programs are going to be eliminated, my response is, what safety net programs? Because, you know, and it's just so dishonest. And then on top of that, to see Bernie saying this stuff, but then not really have a plan for people who won't be able to participate in his jobs guarantee plan. And that's if he can succeed in getting it passed, which without any clear-cut path of implementation, I don't see how that's going to happen. Because in order to be able to pass a plan, you actually have to have a plan. And that means you have to have concrete steps, step 1, step 2, step 3. This is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to make sure nobody's involuntarily excluded. And this is what we're going to do for people who can't be included for whatever reason. In your case, you're taking care of 2 kids with autism. In my case, I'm taking care of an elderly husband who's even more medically disabled than myself. And in some people's cases, it's because maybe they're a square peg that just doesn't fit, that just don't fit neatly into a round hole. Maybe they're better off pursuing self-employment, and they should be economically supported so that they can do that, because that's where they really shine. I mean, this whole idea of punishing people because they don't have a quote job is not progressive. And yet Bernie is passing himself off as this progressive with these bold progressive ideas. There's nothing bold and progressive about denying people access to the resources they need to survive if they refuse to kowtow to you or toe the line. You know, there's nothing progressive about that. And that's what opened my eyes, was seeing for myself how Stephanie Kelton lied in that paper. And number two, seeing what their job guarantee was really about. Number three, seeing that Bernie didn't even have the plan put together. So when people from the Yang Gang were asking Bernie supporters, well, what is your plan? Let's see it. Nobody was able to produce it. Nobody was able to say, this is how it's going to be implemented, and this is how we're going to take care of people so that nobody's left out. This is, how we're going to redefine work and how we're going to ensure that stay-at-home caregivers and moms and whatever get a paycheck. None of that. There was none of that. But you know what I saw when I went to Andrew Yang's site? I saw a bunch of plans. I was just, oh my God, I was blown away. And when I saw other Bernie supporters attack a homeless Yang ganger, a homeless Yang supporter, the woman has 4 kids. Her name's, what the heck is her name now? Jessica Kennedy. Living in a tent with her disabled husband and their 4 small kids. And I saw Yang gangers dogpile on her on Russ Peterson's YouTube channel. He's the guy who has the Broke Folk Vote and the Yang Gang support channel there. I like Russ. I like his wife too. I think they're funny as all get out. Them 2 kids remind me of a younger version of me and my husband. But, oh yeah, I love them 2 kids. But it was really heartbreaking. This woman was fighting back tears, talking about being afraid of Child Protective Services taking indefinite custody of her kids on the grounds of failure to provide, because her and her husband are homeless and poor and living in a tent, not through their own choosing, but because that's because life ended up, barfing on their shoes. They ended up throwing a snake eyes, and it could happen to any one of us. And she was fighting to not cry during that interview. And I saw people that I knew from Bernie circles, that I knew from the Real Progressives group that I used to be in.
Yeah, I don't like those guys.
And they saw these guys attack this girl, this woman.
Like those guys.
They attacked her and said, you don't need free money to support your privileged lifestyle. You need a job. And I'm thinking to myself, I saw that coming from people who claim to be progressives, who claim to care about the poor. This is what they're saying to a homeless mother. And I'm thinking, my jaw just dropped. And I thought, these people are not for the poor. That means they're not for me. I'm batting for the wrong team. And that's when it hit me like a ton of ice water. And I was forced to actually sit there and re-examine everything that I had believed in up to that point and correct course, because that was the wake up call for me, was seeing how disgusting these people were in treating her and other Yang supporters that way. This wasn't, you don't tell somebody who's homeless with their kids and their disabled spouse that they're privileged. There's nothing privileged about that. Nothing. And that just really, as somebody who does know what it is to be that poor, somebody who came from generational poverty. I mean, that woman didn't come from generational poverty. Life just threw a snake eyes on her, but still, I know a lot more about poverty than those guys that were dogpiling on her, and I was just appalled at the things they were saying and the accusations they were making. against not just, you know, Yang supporters, but Andrew Yang's policies and Andrew Yang himself. And that's when I just unplugged and pulled away from Camp
Yeah,
Bernie.
because they seem to take a lot of Andrew Yang's policies and kind of they like, I don't know if it's because they pretend not to understand them. I don't know if it's because they do understand them and want to put out misconceptions and lies and smears. I'm pretty sure that a lot of them still repeat a lot of the same lies, because they're parakeeting what they heard around their circles.
Oh, I think a big part of it is they have a huge unresolved issue of classism. They claim to be progressive, but they have issues with classism. And what I mean by that is they want themselves to have goodies, but they don't want the poor to have goodies. They didn't want that homeless mother living in a tent to have money. They don't want you to have money. They don't want someone like me to have money. See? You know, they only want people that have, you know, and this is the thing that most people who support the job guarantee idea also fail to understand. There is a minimum degree of economic stability. There is a minimum level of resources that you need to already have in order to succeed at getting and keeping a job, any kind of job, including a government guaranteed one that, yes, you can still be fired from if you have difficulty with showing up because you don't have a car, or your kid is sick and daycare wouldn't take them, or your child's autistic and no daycare would take them, or, you know, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So in looking at all these things, it forces a person to take stock. Now, an intelligent person would do like I did. They'd sit back and go, I made a mistake. I need to correct course. I need to be batting on a different team because these cats are not where it's at. And that's what I did. And when I saw that, I immediately reached out, to Russ Peterson, and I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry for, I felt embarrassed at that point to be a Bernie supporter. And I felt, so betrayed, because this is a guy who rode on his reputation of, I'm the guy who fought for civil rights back when Hillary was a Goldwater Republican, and I'm the guy who's, he's the guy who shot off his mouth in Congress about caring about the poor, except when it came time to actually have a plan that would actually help the poor while not alienating the middle class and the people who are at least able-bodied and able to work and have jobs. No, all he did was sell a dream. And I'm sorry, but I'm not in the business of investing in dreams. I need an income I can work with to get myself up out of poverty. And
so that guy you're talking about, is he directly linked to Bernie Sanders and his plans?
who?
The person you're talking about right now.
The person that attacked Jessica Kennedy on Russ Peterson's YouTube channel, you mean?
Oh, no, I must have misunderstood what you said, but you know what really gets me, and it's something that happens all the time, is how they will sit there and literally tell people that the universal basic income is a Trojan horse, that it's meant to gut the system, and it's going to come after everything that could ever help you in your life, and you'll never be able to get those programs again. And people will tell those lies over and over and over
that's
again.
what Stephanie Kelton was doing all over Twitter.
Yeah, but then even right now we're seeing that happen with AOC.
Yeah, and here's the thing that I have a real problem with that. Number one, welfare reform had already effectively gutted most of, the bulk of those programs 25 years ago. And if you're poor and you have no kids and you can't get help, that's the reason why. So when they want to make dishonest arguments like that, what they're really saying is, we don't want to give money to the poor, but we don't want to look like assholes. We want to instead come up with these craptastic arguments and excuses, and we're going to hide behind our, our support for a non-existent social safety net. And that's what I find to be the most intellectually dishonest. And,
the other thing that's really dishonest, and where I was getting at, was like that conversation we were having earlier with that guy. So basically, he sent me a link that was describing the federal jobs guarantee and yada yada, everything.
Yeah.
So I could not help but notice that it clearly said in black and white in literature that if you have this $15 an hour federal job guarantee, you will no longer be able to have your welfare. You will no longer be able to even qualify for the smallest amount of food stamps. So you're basically foregoing your safety net to have a federal job guarantee. And at this point, nobody really knows what jobs are going to be on the table.
And here's
what is it going to take for you to do that job? Do you have to have a special skill? Are they actually going to train you? And if you pay attention to Andrew Yang, and he says this over and over again, that the retraining programs that the government usually takes hold of, they don't work. They're from anywhere between 0 to 15% success rate.
I participated in one with a classroom full of coal miners 2 counties south of me. And out of a class of 50, only one got a chance for a job because he was young.
Yeah.
The rest of us, who were all like displaced homemakers in our 40s, at the time I was in my 40s, and there were guys in their 40s and 50s who were displaced from the mine that had shut down, and from other manufacturing jobs that had shut down in the region. Nobody over age 40 from that retraining class got reabsorbed back into the economy. Not one.
And I love that you just said that, because clearly you just confirmed everything that Andrew Yang's been saying.
Yes, I mean, Andrew Yang is telling the
truth. He talks often about how people like to talk about the unemployment rates being low. Oh, it's at an all-time low. Sure, but you're not taking into account, you okay?
Yeah.
You're not, but they're not taking into account that there were so many people in the last, economic change. There's so many people who were left behind because they were displaced from jobs like coal mining or other jobs.
And because of their age, nobody else wanted them, no matter what skills they ramped up.
Right. Because of their age. So those people ultimately stopped working.
Yeah. I went, and I not only went through that, but I also got selected to be on a team for the Rails Girls Summer of Code pilot program in 2013. My coach was a good friend of mine who's a vet. He's a Gulf War vet named Ed Drain. He's a very good ally in the human trafficking survivor community. He's not a human trafficking survivor himself, but he's an ally to that community, of which I am not only a member, but one of its leaders. And Ed had a little bit of a background as a C programmer, so he got involved with this coding thing. And he became a Rails Girls coach so he could have something to put on his resume. And he opened me up to the world of programming. And I'm a poor woman who didn't even own a computer until I was like 42, 43. Didn't know how to use one, never mind program one. So, for me to try to get up to learning how to code was a really huge feat. But yet, because of my age and being disconnected from the job market for so long, not one employer was willing to give me a chance for a job where I'd have to, be what they call in the tech community handheld or, you know, mentored on the job along the way. They don't want that. They want people who already have experience, who can walk in, wade through somebody else's shitty spaghetti code and shit, you know, and unfuck some other developers' antiquated code that, you know, is no longer being supported by a platform or whatever, and totally fix it. I mean, I had somebody through Upwork. This is one of my failed bids at trying to get a gig on Upwork, where the guy's like, well, I'm looking for Python programmers, and I don't mind if you have to learn while on the job. And I'm like, okay. I didn't know any Python programming. I knew Ruby, and I knew F#, and I knew a little bit of Haskell, because I have a math degree. So it makes sense that I would kind of gravitate towards the more mathematical-oriented programming languages, or what they call the functional programming languages, like F# and Haskell. So, you know, and by this time, I'm like 6 years into my attempt to break into tech, my attempt at trying to re-enter the workforce, during the whole time which I had no income, mind you. So I was like, sure, you know, if you're willing to bear with me as somebody who doesn't know Python from a hole in the wall, and, you know, would probably need to reach out for help, you know, I'll take this job at, you know, whatever you feel is a worthwhile pay for an entry-level developer. And it was like $20 an hour. Okay, I'm working for home, $20 an hour on a gig contract. Well, when I got stuck in part of the project and didn't know what to do, and, you know, I reached out for help and support only to not find a helping hand reaching back, and I was stuck sitting for 4 days unable to produce any code, you know, I was, you know, told goodbye, you know. And
so
this,
you were let go from the coding job.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't trained or helped or anything or mentored. And this is why, you know, it's like, could I have learned it on my own? Not in the time frame that an employer would want, you know. And you know, this was like a temporary gig that was just like, you know, for a 3-week task, you know, a short-term contract. So you know, there's been no clear path up out of poverty for me. And eventually I had just gotten to the point where I got so fed up, I gave up, because I don't have an income.
Frustrated and gave up, huh?
Well, when your utilities are being shut off every other month because you don't have any income, how the hell do you keep on trying? How the hell do you keep trying to access training when you don't have money to pay for it? You don't even got money to, you know, keep a roof over your head or your utilities on. It's just not going to happen. And I just finally said, you know what, fuck it. Excuse my language, but fuck it, you know? And Bernie's job guarantee initially sounded so good to me, because coming from a very disadvantaged life, you know, in a very disadvantaged background that started when I was 12, when I was basically orphaned and trafficked, you know, along with my older sister. You know, I had a ton of adversity to try to overcome, during which throughout my life I literally had very little to no help. And it's a miracle I'm not dead, you know, to be honest with you. So initially I was really taken in by Bernie's, you know, talk. But talk needs to be backed up with an actionable plan, you know, or else it's no good. And you know, the way the job guarantee was sold to me by these people was, just think, you won't be poor because of discrimination anymore. Now, to somebody who's suffered total social exclusion and total marginalization as a poor woman my whole life, you know, that was like music to my ears. And I never, you know, it's just, I was so desperate to believe that these people cared and would have my back and the backs of others like me. And then to find out that, well, no, they don't even have a plan. They lied in their economic papers. And these are the people that are steering Bernie's policy. And Bernie's not willing to listen to anybody from the UBI side at all. When he initially was giving the appearance of being, at least on the surface, somewhat sympathetic to the UBI promoters. And I just started to think, man, you know, it just left a big sour taste in my mouth. And when I saw the way that Jessica Kennedy and Russ Peterson, the YangGang fella, who was doing the broke folk vote thing on his YouTube channel, I was just so disgusted and appalled, because the people who were being attacked were not the privileged rich tech bros and rich right-wing libertarians that hate the poor, that these Bernie supporters were claiming everybody in the YangGang was. So,
you know, the funny part about that is that there's so many people that are YangGang who came from Bernie's support originally.
I believe it because, hello, they got their eyes opened up like yours truly here, and they had to sit back, and like intelligent thinking people, they decided they needed to correct course. And I'm not surprised at all, because when I saw when I saw, number one, the viciousness with which these people who clearly had never experienced poverty themselves, the way they were, the accusations they were leveling against people who actually know something about it, that to me was appalling and unacceptable. What then became unacceptable was when I further started digging in to the background of Stephanie Kelton and her colleagues at the Levy Institute. And I saw that, you know, what these people are proposing is nothing that, it's not really going to help anybody. It's going to only help a very narrow handful of people. They talk about how the UBI is only going to help the rich tech bros. Well, their plan, if they can even put one together, is only going to help an even smaller group of people than that, you know. And it's the smaller group of people who still have a car, still have a place to live, still have their health, so they're able-bodied, and you know, who have a little bit of basic economic security, but they don't right now have a job. That's the only group that's going to be helped. It's not going to help everybody who's lost everything. There's 95 million Americans who are not in the labor force, who gave up looking for jobs. Many of them probably ended up homeless. Nobody's investigating what happened to them.
Yeah.
You know,
they're either homeless, or they're on various forms of other, like, welfare or means-tested programs for money. So unemployment does not count those heads.
No, it does not. And what I felt was really disturbing was, you know, in the whole thing behind the jobs guarantee, which made it completely antithetical to FDR's vision of his second Bill of Rights that Bernie supporters are so fond of pointing to. I mean, Alexandria AOC always points to this. But yet, when you look and you see, by reading through, and I linked another article written by Matt Berning, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and he basically following the links and going right to the source, because I'm not going to just take somebody else's word for it. I'm going to go to the horse's mouth rather than the horse's ass.
Right.
Before I make a decision. And when somebody who was a Yang supporter actually sent me a link to Matt's article, well, I didn't know this Matt guy from a can of paint. But when he backed his stuff up with links to where Randall Wray and Stephanie Kelton and Bill Mitchell and Warren Mosler, who, by the way, is a retired billionaire hedge fund manager. So when next time Bernie talks his nonsense about, we got to get the billionaires and blah, 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 you ask him why he's climbing into bed with Warren Mosler.
Wow.
I mean, I don't care if Warren Mosler's rich. You know, great, give me a UBI. I'll dig my way out of poverty. You know, I'll open up a trading account. I shouldn't say this online. I don't want anybody to know that I know how to trade. You get my point here. You know,
Yeah.
Bernie, you know, whips up this anger and this frenzy at the billionaires, and then he climbs in bed with Warren Mosler, who's the founding father of the federal job guarantee and the Levi Institute, and you know, the whole thing with the modern monetary theory and all that. You know, and that was one of my questions too before I finally broke off from you know, Camp Bernie. Was I asked, well, you know, if the government spends money into action and the government can do this, and you know, I believe that MMT, being that we're in a fiat currency, does work this way, then what's the big fat hairy deal about not also using the power of the purse, or the power of Congress, to spend some money into existence for UBI? You know, get the UBI first and then talk about a job guarantee, so that at least there is a guaranteed floor, social floor, through which no one can fall. That would make.
You want to know something, and like I like you spoke on Scott Sanson's earlier, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I saw a video on YouTube of him talking about why it's better to have a basic income as far as a first priority. And I think one example that he used is like it was something close to someone that I know personally, where they were taking a job and they needed to get steel-toed boots for this job. Now, this person never had a job where they needed steel-toe boots, so they didn't have just steel-toe boots just hanging around in the house or anything. This person actually had to go out
Those are
and buy
expensive.
steel-toe boots. Exactly. So this person actually had to go out and find steel-toe boots and buy them. So this person not having income, not having a job, how does this person go to the store and purchase steel-toe boots that he needs to get a job? He needs to do a job that he just recently got if he doesn't have the money to buy them.
Well, that's exactly.
And Scott Sanson's message, and he kind of like hinted toward that same aspect, towards that same concept, that he would need a basic income. He would need money for those boots in order to go to work the next day and work that job that he needed to do with those boots. So,
Exactly.
Obviously he wouldn't be able to do that without an income, without money.
Exactly.
He'd have to go and beg somebody to go and be like, hey, listen, I'll pay you back on my first paycheck, I promise. Or have to go to somebody who probably wouldn't expect them to pay them back and just wants to genuinely help. He'd have to literally beg someone for money to get those boots.
This is what I was going back to. What I was saying is that there's a minimum level of economic stability and access to resources that a person has to have before they're able to get and keep any kind of job, including a federal guaranteed one, if such a program was ever implemented, and that's, and Scott Santon's one. Now, I haven't always seen eye to eye with him, I disagreed with him. I think neoliberalism had a lot to do with, making the welfare program suck. He was claiming, no, they sucked from the get-go and always were intended to suck. But that's a minor semantics issue at this point, because there is no safety net anymore. But the thing is,
you feel like back then it was something that was really helpful because back then it worked.
Well, I remember being 12 years old when my sister and I were orphaned and homeless and hungry and living literally on the streets of Philadelphia and didn't know where the fuck our next meal was coming from. And she dropped out of high school at the age of 17 and went down to the local manpower office to register for a job through CETA, which CETA was the Great Society program that provided a toehold under the jobs ladder for the extremely poor, for poor, disadvantaged people. And this was right after.
That was like a job. Was that like a job program?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it was geared towards helping people that were disadvantaged for getting jobs. You know, it wasn't a universal program. It was if you're poor, if you're on welfare, if you're a woman, if you're a minority, if you're, you know, a middle-aged worker who lost their job and you're up against the wall of age discrimination, you know, if you're from, you know, generational poverty, regardless of your gender or your race or your age, you know, well, you know, they found a job for you, but they were jobs within the private sector. CETA subsidized your wages and made sure that you had training while on the job, and it was done in conjunction with private employers. I mean, the CETA program, you know, would have been a great help for us, but Reagan had just gutted it and eliminated that program just in time when my sister needed it, when we were left orphaned. So here I was, age 12, and she was 17. Well, I certainly couldn't get a job. I was a child. So she got the only job available to poor women then, which was working as a sub-minimum wage waitress, no health benefits, no nothing, not enough of an income to afford a decent place to live and food and utilities and clothing, you know, and I was still a growing child, you know, I didn't want to go into foster care. My sister was the only family I had left. No shit, you know, I'd want to stay with her, you know, this is no brainer, right? Well, these guys that were regulars at the diner that she worked at promised her a job that would pay enough, you know, that we would never be hungry and homeless again. Well, they ended up being human traffickers, but we didn't have that word back then. And that's how my sister and I both got trafficked, except she didn't live to tell about what happened to us. I did.
Wow.
And,
I'm sorry about that.
And the thing is that, so when initially I was very defensive against any attacks against the jobs program, because I'm thinking back to being that hungry, scared, homeless 12-year-old little girl. And when my sister was turned away because the CETA program had been eliminated just at the time that she needed it, you know, I was just horrified. I wasn't really in an emotional space to listen to anything anybody else had to say. Because, you know, I suffer from what people on the left call the hidden injuries of class. You know, it's very, very hard to be open to a different idea when your life experiences, which has been a never-ending shit sandwich from the get-go, has, you know, taught you that, you know, because you're poor and you're female, you're never going to be good enough. And no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, it's never going to be the right thing. That you don't have the right thing, and what you have is not enough. And it's really, I don't know how else to describe that.
Well, I could recall from when I read your blog on the Medium site about the federal jobs guarantee and, you know, your support for UBI. I know that in that article you had also written about experiences that women had to go through when they were entering the workforce. Where men were feeling threatened because to them it was like, you know, I think in the article you said, how dare you, a woman, come here and try to take my job? And there were men who did not appreciate that, and they were, you know,
I actually experienced that.
There were threats on women.
I actually experienced that myself. I actually personally experienced that. When I escaped my traffickers, and I obviously didn't have an education, so I couldn't go get a professional job, I tried to break into the trades union. And, you know, every time I hear this working class hero rhetoric, it makes me want to vomit, because I think of the guys who slashed the tires on, you know, on people's cars because they were minorities and they were trying to get a good paying union job. And I think of the way I got threatened. And, you know, actually there were guys that actually sabotaged the scaffolding that I was supposed to work off of as a plasterer, with the intent that the scaffolding would collapse with me up on it, that I would get injured or killed on the job, you know, to quote, teach me a lesson for trying to take away a man's job. Yes, I lived that shit. And this was mind you, this was during the better times, before things had gotten to the point where they are now, that, you know, there is no real social mobility for the majority of Americans who are not already born into the upper middle class. So, you know, I experienced these things. My husband, you know, his mom, because of head and master laws that were in the books until the 1980s, his mom got cheated out of her own divorce settlement. I mean, it's a long story, but it was an arranged marriage. You know, he was from rural poverty up here in Erie County. His mom was orphaned and raised by an aunt and uncle who were successful farmers, and they arranged her marriage when she was like 15 or 16. And she walked out in the barn one morning to get her husband, her new husband. They weren't married more than a couple days. And he's out in the barn having sex with a cow, and that freaked her out. Oh, hell yeah, she freaked out. And she ran in the house, and she told his mom, who was her mother-in-law, you know, what her son Raymond was getting up to out in the barn. Well, needless to say, she wasn't believed, and then her husband came in, beat the shit out of her, and knocked her backwards on the bed, and she drew up both of her knees up to her chest, and boom, drop kicked him in the freaking gut like a mule. Well, mule kicked him right out the second floor window. And she went back to her aunt and uncle, who had basically, you know, taken her in when she was orphaned. She was 3 years old when her mom died. And she went back to live with her aunt and uncle, and they got a divorce settlement. But it was her uncle who got the divorce settlement. I mean, it was like heads of cattle and some money and some land. So, you know, he got that. She was turned out with nothing. And then, you know, she was, you know, like homeless and working at odd jobs as a waitress. This is during the depths of the Great Depression. And then she met, you know, my husband's father, Claude Homan, who had a disability with one of his eyes. So he got a deferment. He wasn't, you know, drafted for the war effort. And he had a WPA job. But, you know, just because he had a WPA job, she didn't have any economic security. This guy drank up his paycheck. So, you know, her and my husband, who was a little baby at the time, they were homeless and living in a tent while she was working, picking potatoes, digging potatoes out of the frozen ground in a desolate Erie County winter. So when
just to make money,
just to try to not die from poverty, and this is before there was
to make money to eat and feed the kids.
Just to make money and feed the kids. She lived in a tar paper shack that didn't even have running water or an indoor bathroom until there was a welfare program, because it was the county welfare that came out and put it in for her. So when somebody like Stephanie Kelton wants to sit there, and Randall Ray wants to sit there and say welfare never lifted anybody out of poverty, bullshit. My husband grew up in third world rural poverty in this country, right here in Erie County, Pennsylvania, not some other place overseas, right here. And I know that. And he's up in bed snoring away. God bless him. I'm glad he's old enough that he can sleep without.
So I'm sure you knowing the benefit of how that helped that situation, I'm sure that it kind of burns you up to, you know, at first hear people drag the welfare system and call it useless, like it never helped.
I mean, there are a lot of problems with it. I mean, the problems came in with the means testing and this notion that, and Scott Santens calls it paternalistic neoliberalism. Now, Scott,
I mean, we know that the welfare system is not perfect, and it hasn't been perfect for a long time. But there's no denying that back then times were different. And back then, they did help certain people get out of those bad situations.
We're talking about a situation where people were dying of starvation and freezing to death and homelessness during the heyday of America's golden middle class age. And and people can feel free to fact check that. Now, that's not to say that a better solution wouldn't have been a universal basic income.
Oh, of course. But at the time, that's all that there was.
At the time, that's all that that people were willing to even discuss. And there was a lot of people who weren't poor and who weren't suffering that even begrudged the poor that, because I can tell you, I grew up really poor in a very poor Philadelphia neighborhood. I remember middle class people bitching that my people, like my family, got once a month a block of that shitty fucking government cheese, and I used to roll it up and make super balls out of it and bounce it off the Kohl's grocery store across the street from the second floor back porch. Me and my sister used to make super balls out of this cheese and bing it off of the windows in the Kohl's grocery store and watch it bounce. I mean, the stuff was barely edible. But yet, people that were lucky to have middle-class jobs and be living the good life, they were so selfish, they even begrudged the poor that. So when people like Steve Grumbine and real progressives and these other Bernie supporters say that, the reason why the middle class is so mean and nasty to the poor is because of a scarcity problem, that they feel anxious. No, they were always that way to the poor, even when things were going pretty damn good for them. And they were able to afford, a brand new car for the husband and the wife, a little ticky-tack home in the suburbs, and an annual vacation to freaking Disneyland. And so don't let that rhetoric fool you. I lived this. I saw it. I suffered through it. I know. And, the whole truth is not being told. And I had hopes for Bernie because he had been this powerful voice in speaking to things, but he never spoke to the issue, other than his job guarantee of actually helping, the poorest and most discriminated and marginalized and disadvantaged people. Other than, there'll be a plan to lift you up with a job guarantee. I have yet to see that plan, but I've seen a lot of Yang supporters ask him about it. And what disturbed me and finally moved me over to Camp Yang was seeing the treatment, that other poor people who were Yang supporters, what they were getting from Bernie's camp. And it just...
Well, I'm sure it kind of brought back, kind of like a time where you personally were targeted in that way.
I remember being stood up and shamed as a little girl in the public school that I went to. And I went to school in a working class neighborhood. So, I mean, this wasn't like, doctors' kids and lawyers' kids and banker presidents' kids. These were, these were kids whose dads and had good paying blue collar union jobs that lifted them up into the, higher end of the working class, that they were actually able to afford a middle class life. And I remember being stood up and shamed as the grandchild of Holocaust survivor refugees, mind you. Okay, yeah. Just want to put that out there. I remember being stood up and publicly shamed by a teacher because I couldn't afford an art kit to participate in a project or in a class. Because, there wasn't money to afford clothing and freaking food. And I got shamed in front of the class for that. And when I saw how these Bernie supporters that were part of Steve Grumbine's group, Real Progressives, how they were dogpiling on Jessica Kennedy on Russ Peterson's YouTube channel, it just instantly brought back a flood of memories that are as clear as if I had just experienced them yesterday. You don't forget stuff like this. You don't forget things. And when Bernie wants to ramble on about his jobs guarantee, anytime he's approached by a UBI supporter, whether or not they support Andrew Yang, just a UBI supporter in general, to me, it just smells of disingenuousness that, there really isn't a plan.
Well, here's the thing, though. Like, part of his federal job guarantee plan, I guess I understand that it has to do with rebuilding infrastructure. I understand that it probably has something to do with building housing, like low-income housing for whoever, or just building a house, a building from the ground up. Now,
so that's not going to help women like us.
You're right, but the thing
we
with
can't
that,
go get them kind of jobs.
Right, but the thing that I understand too is that if you're looking at the way technology is changing, the way the shift is going,
they can 3D print a freaking house.
Exactly.
I actually saw this and I thought this was amazing, because when I got exposed to technology, it was in my later years in life, and I got exposed to some things, and I remember thinking, wow, holy shit. What if they could 3D paint a car like the Jetsons that you get into it, and you don't need traffic lights anymore because that bitch is going airborne. You have to deal with it. Oh, man. And I'm thinking about this stuff, and I wasn't the only person thinking about it. And this young 20-year-old kid who's sitting next to me, he knew I was thinking about it. And he goes, so you're the grandma who's the mathematician who's a grandma nerd. And I'm like, I never had any kids. I'm not a grandma. And he was like, okay, so you're a Mrs. Nerd. And I'm like, yeah. And we were just talking about all these possibilities. And this was at a conference in Buffalo. It was at a Ruby conference. And Buffalo's 90 miles from me. And when we had a vehicle, I was able to go to that. I was able to drive there and drive home one day. I didn't have to worry about affording a motel room overnight or anything. But I met a lot of interesting people. And I saw that, there was stuff that I would have never imagined was possible when I was a child and when I was a young woman. And, remember, I wasn't even old enough to vote until after Ronald Reagan was already in his second term of office in the 1980s. And you look back on YouTube, the old movies from the 1980s, you'll see, what the level of technology was back then. You'd probably be thinking it's Stone Age compared to what's possible now. But when Bernie talks about these jobs, I don't think he realizes, I don't think he's being honest with himself. And I don't think the people on his team are being honest with themselves about the true measure of in the depth and degree that technology really is having. So what are the jobs going to be? Well, that will be taking care of kids. Well, you're not going to get any ornery 50-year-old people who already raised their own kids who are going to want to go be daycare aides and have to take 2 buses because they don't have a car because they're that poor. That's a 2-hour commute. Remember, when you're depending on a public bus, if you have access to public transportation, what's a 10 or 15-minute commute by car across town is a 2.5 to 3-hour commute by bus. Now you multiply that times twice a day for an 8-hour day job. You're talking about a 14 or a 15-hour day right there. And, that's not something.
That's the other thing that you're touching on, and I appreciate that you even mentioned it, is childcare.
Yeah. And that's the slap in the face.
It's like what you mean to tell me is that I have to get this federal job or I
Yep.
have to get a job, point blank, period, right? And
Or
then I
else your
have to
poverty
rely,
will be your choice.
and then I have to rely on someone else to come and watch my kid for me, and that person's getting paid because it's considered a job when they do it.
That's
But
right. But not if
if
you
I
do.
if I decided to stay home and care for my own children and be responsible for my own children, I can't get any income because it's not considered a paid job. But if I watch someone else's child and that person watches my child, it's considered work.
Yeah, and that's the whole hypocritical thing that really actually drove the final nail in the coffin for me and moved me firmly into Camp YangGang.
Yeah, but that's just
Because
like
I'm
how we
dealing
mentioned.
with a
That's just like that's just like how we mentioned about building houses or building some type of infrastructure. Is you can now use 3D printing
yeah,
to print a whole house
yep,
in
foundation and
48
all.
hours. In like 48 hours, house complete.
Yep, yep, with no risk of workplace accidents, anybody, suing their,
Nobody's gonna break their back. They
nobody's
won't need
right.
to hire. They won't need
Nobody's
to
gonna
hire
fall to
like a
their death,
crew. They
you
won't need
know.
to hire like a crew of 50, not 50, but they won't have to hire a crew of 20, 30 guys to come and prop up a house, and it's not going to take like 8 months to do.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is too, like what you were mentioning about the child care. I'm in the situation with elder care. I'm battling my own disabling health issues as an older woman who's a diabetic and a Crohn's patient, but my husband, who's far older than me, is dealing with being a heart patient and a diabetic, and he has prostate trouble. He might have cancer. I mean, we don't know. And you know, he has difficulty getting in and out of bed. He has difficulty with dressing himself. So I find it really beyond hypocritical that a jobs guarantee would deny everybody a universal basic income, which would cover caregivers like you, like me, um, and say to me, well, you go work as this teacher's aide, but it's going to take you 6 hours worth of transport by taking 2 buses because you're not, living in an area with decent public transport to get to the nearest school where you'll have that job and then get home. But meanwhile, we'll pay somebody else to take care of your husband. Well, if it's work for them to come in, why isn't it work for me? Why isn't it a job for me that's worthy of a paycheck? Just like, why isn't you taking care of your kids a job for you? All right.
Yeah.
To me, this makes no sense. It's a slap in the face, and it's dishonest as all hell. And every Bernie supporter that says, "Oh, but the federal job guarantee, your position as a caregiver can be," well, that's not good enough.
Yeah,
That's
I
not
want
good enough.
to hear that I will get a check.
That's not good enough. And I'll tell you why. Because when they say that it's left up to the local community, and here's the problem I have with that. I lived through the entire Reagan Revolution when social programs for the poor were being eliminated, were being slashed. The budgets were being slashed to render them ineffective, all the way up through when Clinton drove the nail into the coffin with his Welfare Reform Act of 1996. And the overarching prominent message that was repeated time and time again was that this country's poorest women, who were stay-at-home moms, okay, were quote doing nothing but sitting on their asses and eating bonbons. Yeah, that taking care of their
But if
kids
I
was,
hire someone else, to come to my house and watch and supervise my kids and sit on my couch and watch my TV and eat my bonbons, they would get paid.
yeah, and that to me, I just, when somebody tells me that, well, the federal job guarantee could, well, no, I don't believe it will, and I'll tell you why. Because this country has been pumped with neoliberal propaganda that was sold by very powerful, well-heeled interests like the people at the Levy Institute that was peddled to the public. You know, they peddled this dog shit to the public while calling it chocolate candy and saying, you know, that oh, these poor women that were taking care of their kids were doing nothing. And that has stuck. Words have a certain staying power. And I learned this as a leader in the trafficking survivor community when I took on the Associated Press and battled with them for almost 4 years to force them to stop calling child sex trafficking victims prostitutes. Because I understand the staying power of words very well. And when the staying power of words is such that the public psyche has fully absorbed this idea that work that is predominantly women's work of caregiving is nothing, and that's an excuse for throwing the country's poorest women off of welfare, then why should I believe that my local community will suddenly turn around and recognize every caregiver as being deserving of a paycheck under a federal jobs guarantee? I'm not buying it. Show me proof. If you can't show me proof, if you can't show me the numbers, I mean, there's a saying in the nerd community, in God we trust, everybody else bring data.
Yep.
Works for me. You know, I don't believe that that caregivers really will be recognized and as actual working and be provided with an income, because the whole premise for welfare reform, the whole premise starting from the Reagan Revolution onward was, oh, those poor women are doing nothing. That caregiving is doing nothing. And this was the pablum that was force-fed to the public day in and day out. You had shock jocks and hate speech radio icons like Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh, who made their pile off of feeding off of that and stoking that sentiment among the public and making a handsome fortune doing so for decades. Now, you mean to tell me all of a sudden the public is now going to suddenly recognize that poor women deserve an income if they're staying at home with their kids, or they're staying at home to take care of a disabled relative or spouse or elderly family member or spouse for lack of option? I don't buy it. I don't buy it. If I don't see it encoded specifically in black and white in the program and a plan for implementing the program, I'm not buying it. And I think that this is something that really needs to really be hammered on more, because people don't realize just how insidious that whole thing has been. And that, no, you know, this federal jobs guarantee thing, first of all, I think Scott Santens called it right in his last article that he wrote, one of his final ones that he wrote on Medium. He doesn't write on Medium anymore because Medium, for some reason, doesn't support Patreon or something. I don't know. Anyway, he wrote in one of his last articles that one of the questions that we should be asking is why, you know, if their idea is so great, why would they, if they really care about helping the poor, then why not have a UBI in addition to a federal job guarantee? Because the UBI will guarantee a floor.
A UBI that's not going to be means tested and is not going to stigmatize you.
Correct.
And if you earn an income, you can also stack with.
That's right. That why not have a UBI and a federal jobs guarantee both? Why not prioritize the UBI first so that the jobs guarantee is truly not going to devolve into a draconian, you know, workfare 2.0 program.
See, and that's the thing, is that I keep hearing a lot from people who are like anti-Yang for whatever reason, and they support Bernie Sanders. a lot of times what they'll say is, oh, well, you know, the UBI, it has to stack with welfare for me to support it. The UBI, it has to, he has to, why can't he do a federal job guarantee with UBI? Well, my question is, why isn't Bernie doing that?
Why can't Bernie do a UBI with the federal job guarantee?
Like they expect Andrew Yang to just like wave his magic wand and make it what it is, right? But
I
they
think
don't have
Andrew
the same
Yang,
expectation with Bernie Sanders. They don't hold his feet to the same fire.
no, they don't. And the thing is, and part of it is, and there's another Bernie defector who's also a middle-aged woman. In fact, I think she's an adjunct college professor. And you know, adjunct college professors, they get paid about minimum wage. And she was one of the ones on my page, you know, helping us deal with that Bernie guy that was being an obnoxious troll on my
Okay,
page.
I think I recall who she is.
Yeah.
She did chime in a little bit.
Yes, she did. And he just completely refused.
Shout outs to her, though. Shout out to her. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marie, because you know what? You pointed out some really glaring inconsistencies. I believe the word she used was incongruencies, and that is on point because it is incongruent. You know, the whole argument that the other guy was making and that Bernie makes for his federal job guarantee really is incongruent. You know, and this is like I said, you know, a lot of burners like me who are no longer burners, we woke up to the fact that, you know, hey, Bernie talked a good game, but that's about what it's been, is him talking a good game. That when you really, you know, corner him on, you know, a definitive plan and how to implement it, you know, he evades the issue. And when you ask job guarantee supporters like Stephanie Kelton, you know, and all them, you know, well, are you going to take one of those guaranteed jobs? And you ask one of these middle-class white dudes who's too busy being pissed off at rich people to give a shit about helping poor people, who's in Steve Grumbine's group, well, you know, hey, you know, you ask one of them, you know, are they going to take one of these minimum wage, you know, federal job guarantee jobs? You notice that the answer is crickets. It's dead silence. Now, why is that?
See, and the other thing that I want to bring up too is that, like in the very beginning, when more people started paying attention to Andrew Yang, originally his universal basic income had a cap where you would have to be 18 and over, but not older than the age that you can get Social Security benefits. So he had that age cap. But then, you know, I guess he changed his mind because people brought it up to him like, well, why, how, you know, you're calling it universal, I guess. Like, why would you have an age cap?
Well, not only that, but it hurts elderly women who
Right.
don't even get a Social Security benefit because they were unpaid.
And you don't even have an option to even get a job.
And you don't even have an option to get a job.
Right.
You know, and
so he took that into consideration and he changed that part of his policy. And he went back and he changed it and he said, okay, so 18 years to you expire, 18 years to life.
18
you
years
will get this universal basic income for life.
That at least this country will not devalue you and tell you don't deserve to survive. You know?
So then today I was actually on Twitter and I noticed that Andrew Yang wrote a tweet where he said that something to the effect that he just purchased his ticket to LA to go to the debate. So, I mean, today's Sunday, so there wasn't much activity out, but I'm assuming pretty soon there's going to be news that he actually qualified his last poll to make it to the debate. I mean, you know, that's the best conclusion I could draw, because why else would he talk about having a ticket to LA to go to the debate? But besides the point, somebody had written on there about the universal basic income, and this happened to be somebody who is disabled and has loads of other health issues. And I guess one of them had to do with having an issue with memory, you know, having a problem with their memory.
and a slew of other things that disable this person from being able to work a job out in the open, whether it's a federal job or whether it's a community job or whatever it is. So this person legitimately cannot work, and they are relying on $1,000 of SSI, and combined with a food stamp. I think they said the total was like $1,000 is what they're getting and relying on right now to survive. So somebody in the Yang Gang had retweeted and tagged Andrew Yang to, the post. So Andrew Yang actually retweeted back and said, I want to do so much more than this.
I believe that.
He kept it sweet and short and to the point. He said, I want to do more than this. I want to do a lot more than that.
Well, I believe that because, after I got over my initial scare away from the Yang Gang, which, you can understand why my initial knee-jerk reaction was what it was. But when I got to realize, when my eyes were open to what really was going on, I found Andrew Yang to be somebody that if you approach him and say, hey, look, this is the problem with your plan, and, which is what happened when people approach him with the problem of excluding seniors. It would hurt, older women who didn't have the chance to accumulate enough work credits to get a Social Security check and don't even have the opportunity to be able to get a job anymore, because they're old now. And they would be left with nothing, if they lived to be age 65. And the fact that Andrew Yang went back and readjusted his plan, that shows me that this is a candidate who not only has a plan, but he is sensitive enough to the needs of people that if he sees that something's really not tenable or something's really going to harm a large group of people, he is willing to go back to the drawing board, so to speak,
and fit it in
and correct course. And I think that it's really unfair for people who are against Andrew Yang to slam this man and say, oh, see, he's just a snake oil salesman. No, he's not. He's somebody who shows proof that, number one, he knows how to roll up his sleeves and solve a problem. And if it's not a good solution, he knows how to roll up his sleeves and go back to the drawing board and correct course. That is something we should admire and respect. And I just feel so strongly, especially since coming over to the Yang Gang, I feel that Mr. Yang is owed more than an apology from MSNBC. He's owed an apology. Now, like I said, Bernie Sanders may not be aware that Stephanie Kelton really is a liar and, a fraud who published an outright lie in an academic paper to promote her agenda. He may not be aware of that, but daggone it, he tapped her as his policy advisor. He therefore bears responsibility,
right,
for having somebody like that on his team. He needs to take responsibility for what she's doing now, and not just push ahead with his rhetoric and hoping that he gets enough people whipped up into a frenzy and rides on his own history. I'm sorry, name recognition means nothing if you don't have a plan, and if you've been shown to have totally discarded the poorest of the poor while having the moxie to allow your supporters to accuse one of your opponents of being rich tech bros that don't care about the poor. I think that that's really unfair. And I think that the people on Bernie's team that are doing this owe Andrew Yang an apology and owe the entire Yang Gang an apology too. Because you know what? We're not all rich tech bros. Many of us are poor women. Many of us are over age 40. I mean, me and Marie are over age 50, I think. I think Marie's over 50. I don't want to speak for her and get her age wrong and then ever get mad at me. But
Right.
there's a lot of older women. D.H. Fabian, who's on my Facebook list, she's a Yang supporter. She's in her 60s. She gets it. And this is a woman who I've known for years as a solid lefty. I mean, we both got kicked off and banned from alternate of all places because we were too radical as leftists. I'm not kidding. So, you know, when people disingenuously, you know, paint the, you know, Andrew Yang as this, you know, rich libertarian tech bro who doesn't care about the poor and who paints the entire YangGang camp as being spoiled young privileged kids, you know, techie kids, you know, they've got it wrong.
I'm far from that.
Yeah, me too. And same with my friend D.H. Fabian. There was a guy, I don't know if you saw his post, he chimed into the conversation on my page when he said that he had applied for disability and was denied. Brian Stetton. He's a friend of mine living down in Florida.
Was he the one that originally wrote that thread on the post, and then we all kind of like took the thread hostage? Was he the main? I think he was the original poster on that post on that thread.
No, Brian
Okay.
came onto my page later on. He's a friend of mine that I've known for many years, and he lives down in Florida. And he was in a coma for a month because he had been really ill. Yeah. And they had to remove a third of his stomach.
Oh, wow.
So he has severe health issues. He can barely walk. He has trouble with eating. He has medically restricted diet. And being, you know, I can understand how this goes because I have Crohn's disease myself. Except I'm in much better.
I don't want to interrupt you, but my battery is kind of low. It's on the exclamation point.
Okay.
I probably have like 2 more minutes or something to talk.
Well, but, Brian Stetton mentioned how he applied for SSI and was denied, and he clearly can't work.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have an idea that I feel like SSI should also be included with it, only because people who are on SSI who have a legit disability, they have just as much chance of having a job as a person who is elderly or senior. They have just as much chance of that person getting a job, which is very slim. It's not a very good chance. So I also feel like SSI and SSDI should both.
Well, SSDI stacks. The reason why SSDI stacks but SSI doesn't is because of the way those programs were designed.
Well, I know because SSI is means tested and SSDI is an entitlement that you paid into through your time working.
Right.
So I understand that, but I just think, I don't know, I just think that a person who is on SSI who has a legit disability that they really cannot get out there and work at all. I mean, I'm sure that person probably has some type of skills, some type of talent, anything that could hold them up. But, you got to think about what jobs are actually available for that person to be able to stack with a guy. But I understand the entire concept and why it doesn't stack right now. But I don't see why later on, if something did present itself, why Andrew Yang wouldn't
get rid of SSI and make the UBI $2,000 a month. That would help too.
Well, he even said that I think in the Breakfast Club interview, he even alluded that if everybody was happy with the first 4 years and everybody's happy with the universal basic income, that if he was given a second term, he would actually up it to $2,000 a month.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is we got to get it implemented first, and
we got to get it implemented, and we have to show that it is a viable system, and because even in Stockton, California, they did their trial. And I believe in Maryland soon they're going to be, launching off their
Yeah.
trial or pilot on the UBI. And of course, we have Alaska, who's had it, a form of it for 40 years or so. But, before we log out of this call, that we just have to get there first. Like
Yes,
he
we
said,
do.
UBI is just the foundation of it. Everything else will just have to follow and stack on top of it. And, as the time goes, if everything is sound and everything is good and there's no, crazy reason why they'd have to scrap the system, there's no reason why you wouldn't believe that as job automation continues and it eats up more jobs and more people are displaced and things get more, more to the point where you're gonna need more than $1,000 a month. I'm sure he will raise that ceiling up and it'll eventually progress to something more.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that is what most people that are promoting, that are behind UBI, want to get to, a point where, having an income to live is decoupled from one's ability to get a job, because there's just, as it stands right now, there's not enough jobs to go around for everybody who wants to work and who can work. And when I say who wants to and can, those are two separate issues, because not everybody who wants to work really is able to. You need a certain level of economic stability to be able to be employable. And if you're older, or if you have health issues, or you're not a digital native and you're not, that what's going to be available to you is going to be slim to nothing. And this is a reality that, needs to be addressed. And, that's why I really liked when I listened to Andrew Yang's stuff after I read his website and realized just, how badly misled I had been by trusting, what Bernie's camp had been selling. And I listened to Andrew Yang's interviews. He struck me as a person who genuinely gets it. And I don't care what kind of label somebody wants to put on him. They can call him a libertarian. They can call him a tech bro. They can call him late for dinner. For all I care, the point is that the guy actually knows what he's talking about and has demonstrated, and this is important, he has demonstrated that he knows how to solve a problem, and he knows how to roll up his sleeves and go back to the drawing board if the solution is not, palatable enough.
Right.
And that's
I believe that too.
That's something that I really admire and respect, and I really like him. And let's say
it shows that he has integrity.
Yes, and it's like, for the people who are still in Camp Bernie, who haven't gotten off the plantation yet, okay? All right? What is the worst that's going to happen if their guy doesn't get it and Andrew Yang does? Well, let's see. We get a polite president. We get a president who's not going to be starting trade wars with every other nation on the planet, including ones that are our allies, like France. Not just China now, but France. I don't know if you're aware of this. Trump started a thing with, slapping tariffs on France now. Trade wars, nobody wins in a trade war. Number two, we would get a president who actually has a plan so that nobody has to die from poverty. We've eliminated extreme poverty. Yes, $12,000 a year or $1,000 a month to start is not a middle-class life, but it's not freezing to death and starving to death out in the street, or living in a tent city out in San Diego where you have a hepatitis or a typhoid epidemic outbreak because the city took away the porta potties, and you've got all kinds of hygiene and sanitation related deadly diseases that were considered to have been medieval deadly diseases, like typhoid and cholera.
I hear that.
And all that. So yes, we have a president who's willing to tackle that problem. We have a president who's willing to take the lead and say, hey, you know what? Women have not been included in the economy, and yet our economy, our society wouldn't even be possible without all the unpaid work that women have been doing all along. We should have an economy that includes them. You know, right. I mean, to me, you know, we get a smart president, we get a polite president, we get a president who actually cares. You know,
what more could we want, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I compare Andrew Yang to other candidates, it's like, okay, here Andrew Yang is the candidate who's smart enough to know that you don't shit where you eat, and then you have everybody else over there.
Right. So I'm gonna let you go, only because I'm on literally 1% battery and it's gonna hang up on you.
Okay.
So we can wrap it up and then I'll link up back with you again.
Let's do it. Let's get our guy in there.
All right, no doubt. Thank you.
Bye-bye.